in the struggle between U.S.-led unipolar world and the emerging multipolar world. He's a co-author of American Exceptionalism and American Innocence: of People's History of Fake News. Please welcome back to the show, Danny Haifong. Hey, Danny.
Hi, Jimmy. Good to be back with you.
Uh, Good to see you. So we're going to jump right into this. This is from CNN Business. The great social media migration, sudden influx of users, United States users, to a thing called RedNote. How do you say that, Danny?
What? Oh, Little Red Book. 小红书.
Okay, Xiaohongshu. Okay, that's a hugely popular social media app in China. More than 700,000 new users have joined. Many of the American users they had joined as an act of defiance against Washington's move on TikTok. Yeah, I did. This is so much better than TikTok, somebody claimed. So this Red Book has created an unlikely platform for Chinese and American users to interact with each other.
Big thank you to all of you on RedNote who gave such a warm welcome to me and all the other Americans who have flooded this app. I did not expect to make so many friends so quickly.
My entire life, we were taught to be scared of the Chinese people. Oh, the Chinese are coming, the Chinese are coming. None of that was true. The camaraderie, the friendliness of the Chinese people, they have welcomed us with open arms. These people are cool, man.
So when people are finding out is that, oh my God, Chinese people are just like us.
We have been fed so much bullshit. The amount of money that they have to spend on groceries, for example, is peanuts compared to what we pay here in Canada, and I'm sure the same in the U.S. It's like night and day. Their world there is so much better than the way they portray it.
Now, Danny, let me bring you in because you've been on this show before, and there's always people in the comments saying that this guy's just a propagandist for China. So let me just give you a chance. Go ahead and respond to that.
Well, I don't want to say it, but I will say it. I mean, I told you so to those who were questioning me. I mean, I've been to China 4 times in the last 5 years, and everything that people are saying on Red Book right now, Jimmy, is what people say to me when I've been in China, whether it's in Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, the most propagandized region that the United States targets to try to label China this human rights catastrophe, or whether it's Beijing and Shanghai, the biggest cities in China. They say the same things. They say that they are building their own system. They're building a system that works for them. And they are actually shocked, just like Chinese users on Xiaohongshu are shocked when Americans tell them the things that they are going through about healthcare debt, about how much an ambulance costs, about how it's so difficult to buy a home, to even afford rent. This is shocking to them because they don't assume that the United States is going to be like this. And they assume that what happens in China should be just ordinarily what happens in the United States. Because in China, you can take a high-speed rail train. We don't have that in the United States. In China, you're not going to go bankrupt if you need an ambulance. In China, if you want to take the subway, you're going to take a clean, a fast subway, and it costs, even in the most expensive city in China, in Shanghai, it's going to cost you 50 cents per trip, no matter how far you go. So that is just, it's always been the reality. But the really striking thing about this, Jimmy, is that Xiaohongshu has basically done what a lot of my work I've been attempting to do over the years has helped facilitate Americans' knowledge, and it's breaking through the propaganda barrier that the U.S. government has tried to impose on us in order to fuel a Cold War against China, all because the United States wants to take away our right. The government wants to take away our rights to use TikTok, which is a huge disaster for the United States, for the economy, for people's rights. In China, the ironic thing, Jimmy, is that in China, the U.S. TikTok, what you can use in the U.S. and Europe and the West, is not. You're not able to use that in China because they don't want that version of TikTok. They have Douyin and they have Xiaohongshu. They have other alternatives that they regulate, that they use for themselves, that are wildly popular, and they don't view TikTok as necessary for their people and their society. And so this is what's so ironic, is that TikTok is being banned in the United States, and people are mass migrating to a Chinese app, the one that you can use a US number for. And people in the United States are learning about China in the same way that I've learned about China by going there, by seeing it, by traveling from east to west, north to south, and seeing what people are doing there to build a better society, a more prosperous society, and one that respects international law, multipolarity, and peace. It has its own problems, it has its own contradictions, but China says that they're going to address those for themselves and they're going to do that without US interference. And that is really all you can ask for in this moment when the United States is going scorched earth all around the world.
If someone said, "Hey, what are the problems of the United States?" I would say the unbelievable explosion of income inequality, the capture of governments by corporations and billionaires, the lack of actual democracy, the imposition of oligarchy, people's inability to access healthcare in a way that doesn't bankrupt them, people's inability to keep up with inflation, the high housing costs, the high costs of education. People are basically in debt and serfs now. This to me is the situation that you would find when a revolution happens. Now, that's what I would say the problems in the United States, which they're huge, right? We still won't give people health care, and we see our infrastructure falling apart when a fire happens in Los Angeles, in a place that they have fires all the time, and they're not ready for them. It took 45 minutes for a fire truck to get to the Pacific Palisades when that fire broke out. So, what would you say is the problems? I mean, that's what two parties, right? So we have two parties in America, but it's really one party. It's the oligarchy party, right? It's the money party. So we have the illusion of democracy, we have the illusion of choice, and we have the illusion of two parties. What would no, no, they only have one party in China. What would be the problems?
Hmm. Well, I'll just name three because I think it's so interesting. Oftentimes, when you say anything good about China, you're called an agent of the CPC, that you never criticize China. But really, you can just look at how the Chinese government talks about China and see that they also talk about problems, even in the state media. And you can clearly, and when you go to China, people will talk about this. There are three critical problems that China is trying to address right now. One is corruption. There's a huge anti corruption campaign within the Communist Party of China right now. There have been thousands upon thousands of arrests, of clamping down on those that have taken bribes, that have gotten rich, that have done bad by people in order to advance themselves wherever they are in China under the banner of the party. So that is happening, and that has been very successful, but it continues to happen because it continues to be a problem. That is something that is very difficult to completely eliminate. Number two, they
Well,
also have income
can I
inequality in China.
can I just see in America here that almost never happens, right? You get Joe
Yeah,
Biden
never.
giving people blanket pardons. You get Nancy Pelosi, who's obviously doing insider trading, and they pass laws that make that stuff legal. So you actually have you have less corruption, it seems, in China than you do in the United States. To me, just from an outsider.
100%. The anti-corruption campaign works, Jimmy. There there have been so many bankers, so many party members, so many people that have violated the laws, the rules, the codes of what it means to follow the rule of law in China and to serve the people. Those folks have been brought to justice. Of course, there's still many out there still in China that they are trying to clamp down on, but it still has happened. And so when we get to this next problem, income inequality, China got really, really, really rich really, really, really fast. And they did it by opening up their economy. That led to a certain level of inequality between those that benefited the most and those that benefited less. Everyone's standard of living, just look at the graphs, look at what the UN says about poverty alleviation, look at the income graphs. You can see that everyone in China over the last 40 years has had their standard of living increase, but it has not been equal, of course. And so right now, China is trying to address common prosperity. They are trying to address the problem of what it means to have rich people that have more money, maybe more wealth than those who do not. And that is the second problem. The third problem, of course, that many people know about is the environment. Massive industrialization, rapid industrialization led to pollution, smog, and difficult living conditions in some of the biggest and most industrialized cities. That problem is quickly becoming one that is close to being solved because of China's massive investments. I mean, I know you're in California, Jimmy. I know they talk a lot about renewable energy there. I'm on the East Coast, where we're in the coastal parts of the United States. They talk a lot about renewable energy, solar panels, windmills, those kind of things. In China, they invest so much in this to the point where 100% of the buses are electric, 70% of the cars are electric, 47,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, and pollution has uh, reduced dramatically to the point where you have former diplomats like Eric Solheim, for example, who can go to China now. He's been traveling to China for decades. He says, you know, in 1990s, he couldn't run in Beijing without a mask and without, you know, feeling like he was going to collapse from the pollution. Now the skies are blue and the air is much more clean to breathe because of this investment. So China has that problem still, though, because they're still a massively industrializing country that uses a lot of coal. So these are the issues that China, just three of them, that China still is needing to address. But the difference, Jimmy, and I think this is what people are learning on Red Book, Little Red Book, Xiaohongshu, is that they are addressing it. They are actually attempting to resolve problems that are massively difficult to address in a world situation that we find ourselves in.
So, is there a homeless problem in China?
Well, Jimmy, in China, there are people who it's a much different kind of society. So if people know the layout of China and its history, they know it used to be one of the poorest countries in the world, and most of the population was rural. So most people lived in the countryside. Most people lived on their land. When industrialization happened, a lot of people moved into the cities to work. The United States corporate media loves to propagandize that, oh, these people are just, you know, they're just moving to the cities, being forced there and forced to work. No, no, no. People wanted to go there to the cities because they wanted to make more money, because you can make more money working in a factory than you can, you know, selling crops in the countryside. So when that happened, uh, there was, of course, an imbalance. China had to create a housing system called Hoku. And what China did, though, was they ensured that people who came from the countryside always had their land. They never took away their land. They never said, you can't have your land anymore. The land, especially in the rural areas, is people's property. So people always have a place to go back to. China's homeless problem is very, very small. And to someone from the United States, it probably looks like zero. Why? Because China does not believe in the idea of sleeping rough, like they say in the UK or in the United States, you know, people who sleep outside, street homeless. You will not find that in China because China does have a relatively robust social services system, and they encourage people who are migrating from the rural areas into the cities, either one, to canteen with factories, which is a very common thing. A lot of Chinese factories will put people up for their jobs, or they encourage people to travel back and you know travel back to the countryside during spring festival, during the off seasons when they're not working in the cities, and to live in the countryside. But until they can, this is another problem I didn't talk about, Jimmy, until there is an even level of development between the rural areas and the urban areas, a very difficult task, but one that is uh, China is very committed to. That problem will not 100% go away. But truthfully, there is not a homelessness problem in China. It is something that exists, but it's very small. It's nothing to the level of the United States. What was the increase this year, Jimmy? 24%, 18%. I forget what the number is. Something astronomical in the last year alone. Homelessness rose under the Biden administration. Every year under the Biden administration, it has risen. That is something that would be unacceptable in China. If the homelessness rate was going up, 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 up every single year, Xi Jinping, all the way down to the lowest levels of government, their heads would be rolling. They would not be in power anymore. That is just something that isn't acceptable. People in China, when I go there, they are shocked. They ask me, it's like, this is very scary that you have people sleeping outside. Very scary that you have people who have nothing, no help, no assistance, that they're struggling with their mental health. Nobody's trying to help them. There's no resources. That's something that is very shocking, I think,
Well,
in China. And Xiaohang Shu again is showing that. I think we're probably going to see a lot of videos come up on that platform from Americans and Chinese users be very
well,
shocked because that's what I
that
hear
was
when
the
I'm
thing
there.
that I remember one of the first times we talked. You know, I was saying this one party rule. It's got to be horrible, and one party rule. Of course, we have the same thing here in the United States, basically, and it's oligarchy rule. And the both parties agree on the most horrible of things. Um, but you pointed out to me that if there's a problem, uh, now you know who to blame. In America, they're doing it right now at the LA fires, right? That Jen Psaki's doing videos on MSNBC and blaming Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And meanwhile, it's the Governor Newsom and Karen Bass who are in charge. And then we have people going on talk shows saying it's not their fault. They're doing a great job. It's not so. But in China, there's only one party to blame. And so consequently, people do get held accountable for things and heads do roll, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, even during COVID, right? Before we knew what COVID-19, all of that was, during the initial period in Wuhan, a lot of local officials were sacked, not because they necessarily did something terribly wrong, but because something went wrong, and during that early novel coronavirus period, and they immediately took action and said, "Well, your leadership wasn't quick enough. You didn't respond quick enough. You're gone." And this is something that happens all the time, especially at the local level, because this is where corruption in China, the anti-corruption campaign, really hones in on, because it's much easier than at the central government level, at the higher levels of government, provincial, etc. It's a lot easier to check people than at the very lowest level, where perhaps you are a single person or maybe a few people who's in charge of a village or maybe a township or whatever it is. It's a lot easier to do corruption there than it is at the highest levels, where you have to abide by stricter rules, and you have far more people looking over your shoulder saying, "Hey, what's going on?" If things don't go right, especially when you deal with bigger policies rather than just implementing them. And
But
you're creating them at the higher level. So that's where a lot of the heads roll, actually, in the local level, because it's much easier to be corrupt at that level in China. And that's what most people will talk about when they talk about corruption. But still, this corruption doesn't reach the level. And I'm glad that you talked about the two-party system, Jimmy, because a lot of people who worship the two-party system in the United States, who are Democrat, Republican, this is the best way, this is the best system, they don't even they love their choices, but then they don't even champion, "Well, what about the European systems? Don't you love them? They're parliamentary. They have, some of them even have 4 or 5, 6. Look at Germany. Germany's full of parties, and they seem to be collapsing too." But in the United States, you have 2 parties, as you said, 1 oligarchy controlling it. In China, people assume that because you have 1 party, you essentially have an oligarchy controlling it. But really, that 1 party has a a hugely robust system that allows for a lot of top-down and bottom-up communication, which is why it works so efficiently. Because if you didn't have quick decision making at the top and the ability for people at the bottom to have their say and you know give their service to the government, understand what it is, and give their contributions, then that system wouldn't work. That system would not be as efficient. China would not be able to alleviate poverty. China would not be able to make quick decisions when needed. They wouldn't be able to industrialize so fast. You need that both top down and bottom up communication, people talking to each other, giving recommendations at the bottom, even voting at the village level, at the municipal level. And then you need people at the top who are chosen from the bottom levels to then implement policy that reflects the interests of the people. But if China had a party, if the Communist Party of China began to act like the United States' political system, the Communist Party of China would be no more. So we have to understand that Chinese people are very, very, very involved. They're very opinionated. If they are not getting what they want, we've seen this at the local level over and over and over again. If they're not getting what they want or that they need, there's going to be new leadership there. And that's what makes the party so flexible. It's why it's been so resilient. And it's why the United States can't stand it, because this is the United States wants to overthrow it. The United States doesn't want a government that can be this efficient, that can grow in this way, and that can compete, because that means the United States will have to compete itself. And you see what's happening here, Jimmy. The United States economy is in shambles. The two-party system is utterly corrupt, and the United States is on a precipitous decline. The United States had a plan for China. The plan was, when the United States normalized with China, that it would push China to become a so-called Western style democracy. That by integrating China into the world market, dividing it from the Soviet Union, essentially creating a huge rift in the socialist bloc, that this would be the downfall of not just the Soviet Union, but also China in China's model of socialism. This was ultimately the plan. The problem is that China didn't want to play ball in that way. So what China did was it said, yes, we want to be part of the world economy. We don't want to be sanctioned. That's what would have been the reality for China, that China wasn't recognized, the People's Republic of China, from 1949 to 1971 at the United Nations, because the United States wouldn't allow it. The Republic of China, based in what was in Formosa, now Taiwan, was recognized as the government of China, even though they were the loser nationalist party that got kicked out for being far too amenable to Japanese and US empire. So when this happened, China said, we are going to be part of the world economy. We have a lot of workers and laborers here. We can develop ourselves and you can make massive profits because our labor is going to be very cheap because we're very poor here. But we are not going to allow you to keep us poor. We're not going to let you turn us into some kind of neo-colony, which is what most of the global South ended up becoming during the age of U.S. What is it called? The New American Century, the IMF, all of that.
Japan took them down. Yeah.
This is exactly what happened. And China was very aware that this was going to be the plan. So what they did is say, well, no, we will open up, but it's going to have to be fair. This is what you hear it all the time, Kurt, Jimmy, you hear it all the time. What does Mike Pompeo, what does Marco Rubio, what do they always say? China's stealing our things. China is stealing our ideas, our patents, all this. No, what China said was, if you enter into a venture with our companies get to learn and understand what you are doing. This is just business. In order for you to use our capital, our labor, whatever it is, in order to reap your side of the profits, well, we want to learn. We want to understand what's going on. So they learn. But it's still up to the Chinese people to do it better. It's still up to the Chinese people to compete and to form their own businesses. So that's what happened. And then China ended up doing better. And China ended up building businesses and companies in industries and moving fast. And now the United States is falling behind in so many different industries. You see this in electric vehicles. In China, I think there were a lot of frustrations over time because it's hard to lock down. It's hard to close the economies. I know in Shanghai, the frustrations were probably the highest. But truthfully, in China, the biggest priority and concern, regardless of what our feelings may be about the virus itself and what happened here and what happened, especially in the West, the biggest concern was ensuring that like older people and things like that and people like that, vulnerable people, didn't die. So people were actually, even though they knew, no one's happy about the massive inconvenience and the problems that occurred from it. Overall, I think they supported the government and still do. But you know what? China's response, one of the things, even though I don't think there could be a good response to something like this, the fact is that China was able to recover and bounce back far faster than anyone else. And I think the big reason for that was the government was ready and able and willing to ensure that people's livelihoods were not decimated through the crisis. And that's a big difference from the United States, where we saw so many people lose their jobs, their homes, their businesses, whatever it may be, because of the fact that the government said, okay, we're going to respond to this, but guess what? You're SHIT out of luck once it happens and after the fact. And, I don't think we've actually ever recovered from that economic crisis, contrary to what the Biden administration says. So, overall, though, China has learned how to do business from the capitalist market, from the US dominated capitalist market. And it ended up building an economy through various industries that, because it has a government, and people think this is bad, Marco Rubio, these guys, who knows what Donald Trump will say when he's finally in office, but it's unfair, right? Janet Yellen, it's unfair. Government subsidies. This is exactly what the United States did during World War II to ensure that the United States didn't end up in a Great Depression that lasted 30, 40, 50 years. Like, that's what would have happened in the United States if the US government didn't say, we're going to pump our military industrial complex full of money, and we're going to allow that to ricochet all across the industries in the United States, the industrial heartland, and that will build jobs, and that will build what people thought was a middle class at that time. China essentially has done the same thing with its own characteristics, and now companies like BYD, and now its car industry, and now industries across the board just lead everything. 37 out of the 44 most advanced technologies are being led by China. And the semiconductor industry, even though it's still behind technically to Taiwan and all of that, it's going to win that race eventually too, if the United States keeps shooting itself in the foot like it's doing with TikTok. If the United States bans TikTok, not only will Xiaohongshu be this huge outlet for people to learn about China, but I think that there will be a massive amounts of unrest and discontent in the United States that will only make people more curious about China and also make people more furious at the government more than they already are. So Donald Trump, I think, he's already thinking twice about this. He better think 2, 3, 4, 5 times about it before going through with it, because it would be a disaster for his administration.
Well, Danny, I have a million more questions to ask you about, but we ran out of time. We have to get to our next guest. I want to say thanks for coming on. It's always informative to have you on. I need to know way more about China than I know.
Let's go, Jimmy. Let's go.
I wouldn't mind. Well, you know what? Look how pretty the city is. Look at that city. Anyway, so Danny, what city is that?
Yes.
Shanghai.
Shanghai. It's a beautiful city. The Bund is beautiful. The Huangpu River, you can like ride on a boat. It's a really beautiful place.
I mean,
especially at night, there's light shows.
It looks kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's massively packed every night. Every single night you go to the Bund, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
Everybody check out